Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Zach from the ZAP podcast. I have always wanted to start a podcast, but I never knew where to start or where to even begin. And then I stumbled across the Anchor app. I love the Anchor app because it's completely free and it has all the editing and uploading capabilities that you need right from your phone. So it's super easy and super user friendly. If you've always wanted to start a podcast, go download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, let's get on to the episode. All right, what's up, everyone? It's Zach, and today I'm here with a very special guest. I'm joined by Julie Kratz. Julie, how are you doing today?
Good. Good to be with you.
Good. Yeah, thank you so much for taking some time to be a part of this today. So, I'm super happy to have you here. Julie is a really cool individual. She's a TEDx speaker, an inclusive leadership trainer, and author, and also a fellow podcaster. So, welcome to the show. That's just a little bit about Julie, but do you kind of mind going into your background, who you are, what you do, all that good stuff?
Yeah. So by day, I do inclusive leadership, training, consulting, speaking, all the things. Spend a lot of time with corporate clients on that journey of inclusion
Mm-hmm.
that most organizations aren't quite where they're at. Before that, I did my own corporate thing. So I spent time in corporate mostly as a people leader in lots of different industries that also were not super diverse or
Mm-hmm.
representative of me as a woman, but certainly not to other aspects of diversity as well. And so, something I've been passionate about the last 8 years or so, I've had a chance to write books. Like I said, host a couple of podcasts on the subject myself, and really try to figure out like what is it going to take for us to pivot to a better world where we have
Mm-hmm.
people that feel seen, heard, and belong in all spaces of their lives.
I love that. I think that that's really cool, and that's for anyone listening. That's actually how I first discovered Julie. At my workplace, there was a little training that we did with that featured Julie talking about inclusive leadership. So that was really cool. To the people that are listening, Julie, what would be the best way for you to describe what inclusive leadership actually is and why that's so important?
Yeah. Inclusive leadership means a lot of different things to a lot of people. So there's no one size fits all
Mm-hmm.
definition. It's not a check the box, one and done exercise. It's really meant to be a series of intentional and consistent commitments to action, and one that I firmly believe that senior leadership especially plays an important role in setting the tone for an organization about what does inclusion mean here? What does it mean for people to feel a sense of belonging? And I believe that inclusive leaders, anyone in an organization, you don't have to have manager in your title even to model what good looks like. And that means, watching out for microaggressions, the
Yeah.
subtle non-inclusive behaviors that signal that people don't belong, calling people in when they make mistakes, as we often do with inclusion, even when we're trying to get it right. And really just stating the importance of everyone feeling like they can bring their full selves to the workplace, which is not commonplace. Most people filter, cover, code switch
Mm-hmm.
into the default mode that's usually defined by the dominant culture or the dominant group inside an organization, which tends to be overrepresented, white, male, straight, cisgender, non-disabled, all those things. So those are the best chances to be an ally, be supportive of someone that's different from yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, a lot of what you do professionally is in that corporate setting, but definitely just great things to apply to our everyday lives too. Just making sure that people feel validated and included and just like they belong. Because I think I'm pretty sure anyone listening and probably the two of us too can both acknowledge times where we've just felt a little uncomfortable in a situation because we didn't feel welcomed or we didn't feel we could be our authentic selves, and it's just a really crummy feeling, right? Like you just you just don't like that feeling. It's very unsettling. So we definitely don't want to make the people around us feel that way as well.
Absolutely. And it's a lot more common than you think. I think a lot of people, especially if you and people like you are well represented inside an organization or a group, this applies to all spaces of our lives. If we don't feel included, we don't feel like we can be our full selves, we're just not likely to stay in
Right.
those organizations. And that's think the real crux of diversity and inclusion right now is that focusing on diversity isn't enough. You have to focus on the inclusive piece because otherwise folks aren't going to stay. And of course, we're seeing, a major talent shortage inside most organizations, most industries where we had so many women
Hmm.
leave the workforce, the great resignation, reshuffle, or whatever we're calling it nowadays. And people of color, of course, overwhelmingly don't want to return to the physical workspace because they're constantly reminded of I'm the only one like me. And those
Right.
microaggressions happen at a much more rapid rate, or you kind of lose that sense of control in physical workspaces. So I think it's really important right now that we're talking about it because those that do this well will win in that competitive marketplace for talent and for customers too.
Yeah, and I think kind of like you mentioned, having the conversations now, I think it's something that we don't do enough of. We don't have those conversations that might be a little challenging or uncomfortable or just, um, just out of the norm, but they're so important just to have the conversations. I think that that's where you really start to see progress or change by just introducing, bringing awareness and having it something that you are more aware of, but also just the whole workplace or community, whatever it may be, just acknowledges these things. And I mean, there's unconscious bias that we have that we don't even realize, and microaggressions, like you said. I think it's just once you can educate yourself on that or educate the whole, I think that that's when you can see some change and improvement.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I make mistakes. I
Sure.
call
Yeah.
it the stumble and the bumble. It's about progress over perfection, and so
Hmm.
being aware of your own limitations. Oftentimes, we're limited by our own set of lived experiences,
Hmm.
so we don't know what it's like to be someone else.
Right.
But we can. That's a empathy bridge. That's a point where we could learn more about someone or their parts of their identity, their story, the unique challenges that they face. And once you have a window into the experiences of others, I think most people are surprised by how vastly different the set of experiences are. The things people say and do that, like you said, kind of give you that icky feeling in your stomach of like, oh,
Right.
ouch.
Yeah.
So being on the lookout for those things, I think, is really important for all of us now more than
Hmm.
ever. And I think also just being really mindful of diversifying your experiences as much as you can, whether that's the folks you spend time with. Most of us spend time with people like us. It's called
Hmm.
affinity bias. And so we insulate our networks with folks like us. And that's not how we learn. We
Right.
learn from folks that are different than us, that have had different lived experiences. And so I think it's really important to diversify your network a bit, follow different people on social, make friends with people that are different from you,
Hmm.
but also to really lend your ear, a listening ear to the conversation, to be mindful about the stories, the microaggressions, and the everyday actions you can take as an ally to be more inclusive for others.
Yeah. I think that's great advice and that's huge. And I like how you say, work towards being like an ally for others. I think it's something that even if maybe you yourself don't experience kind of struggles with inclusion or diversity, it's still like you can still play a very key and important role in it by just being that ally and just advocating for others and just doing what you can to make sure that everyone around you is kind of following suit with that, inclusivity and diversity aspect.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's modeling. I think
Hmm.
modeling is really important. Rarely can we wave a magic wand and will somebody to change as
Right.
much as you might want to change
Hmm.
somebody. You're more likely to have success with showing people what
Yeah.
good looks like. And I think language, the things we say, the things we do, that, there's just subtle things like the word guys, is a very
Yeah.
male dominated word, for example, saying crazy or lame.
Hmm.
It can be very exclusionary towards folks with mental health issues
Yeah.
or disabilities. And when we just flip our language, I think we open the door to others feeling like, oh, okay, I know I'm picking up what you're putting down. I get that you're trying and you're trying. I mean, this is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
So it's continuous effort and learning. I think education is a huge part of that journey. But again, showing people what good looks like. We can
Yeah.
all do more of that. And once people realize, showing compassion, showing empathy, being vulnerable, it doesn't make me weak. It actually makes me stronger,
Right.
and it makes people around me stronger. And you can influence people from using those skills. Not that we should manipulate, I'm
Hmm.
not suggesting that. But with good intention, I think you can really teach others, bring others along around you.
Definitely. And I think, that's a great point that words matter and the things that we say and the way that we model. And you gave some great examples. I remember specifically back, it was, I believe, freshman year of college for me. I'm based in Michigan, so our weather is pretty all over the place. It can be very snowy in April, and then in May it's like 100 degrees. It can just go back and forth. And I remember in one of my psychology courses, I had a professor just kind of mention like a lot of us might say like, oh, the weather in Michigan is so bipolar. And she just kind of went on and said like, do we realize the impact that that might have or something on another person or on a community or on a group, in terms of mental health? So it's just like learning those little things that we might say just like in kind of passing or casually, they can have a huge impact. And it doesn't have to be like directly related to mental health. It could be with gender, it could be with any way that someone might identify. So I think that's a really good call out that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's an example that gets used often. Or,
Yeah.
saying like, "Oh, you're so OCD," when someone
Hmm.
doesn't have OCD. Well, what if someone around you actually does?
Right.
That can be very polarizing
It
to
can.
someone. It can feel very dismissive of a
Hmm.
part of their identity. So watching our language, the other thing is we tend to overuse idioms. And so for folks that are not, English isn't their first language, or, they have not, grown up in American culture, we tend to use a lot of sports references,
Yeah.
knock it out of the park, or rock star, or
Yeah.
war references too are very common. And that
Hmm.
that those examples don't need to come into our everyday language. It can
Right.
be very alienating for someone that really doesn't know what you mean. So
Right.
I always tell people, like, say what you actually mean. You're going to be a clearer communicator. People are going to understand your message better. It's going to
Hmm.
land better, and you're going to get more input from those around you when they feel like they know what you're talking about.
Right.
Just use
Exactly.
real words.
Exactly. So, Julie, something that I wanted to ask you about and kind of pick your brain on is I feel like for me being in my mid 20s, I've kind of had an interesting professional experience where I think earlier on when I entered the workplace, it was kind of like work is work, personal is personal. Like when you come in, like you're leaving that all
Mm.
behind. You're a worker now. And I think now that I'm kind of more into my professional career, I'm seeing workplaces kind of shift a little bit about like, well, now the personal kind of does bleed into professional because it's who you are. And maybe like you don't like flip that switch when you come into the workplace, like you still bring some of that with you. So the question that I have for you in terms of just like inclusivity and diversity, um, sometimes you might work with people and you might not know what their experiences are or their backgrounds or you know anything about their lives. Do you think nowadays it's important to kind of get to know the people that we work with in that space, or is it still kind of like taboo of like, no, we probably shouldn't know, how they identify or what could potentially be inclusive or inclusive to them?
Yeah, yeah. It's important that we bring our full identities into
Okay.
the workplace. And I don't think you ever want to pressure somebody to share more about
Mm-hmm.
themselves than they feel comfortable sharing. So it's a meet people where they're at
Okay.
kind of dialogue. And so for example, I think back to inclusive language, if we know 50% of people in the workplace are closeted, meaning
Mm,
gay people do not feel safe, sharing that
mm,
part, a huge part of their identity, right?
yeah.
And one of the things I think about is just by subbing in the word partner, right? If
Yeah.
I talk about my husband as instead of husband, as a partner, that can just signal that I'm more open to, all types of relationships.
Yeah.
Sharing my pronouns on my email signature, I think is also something I can do as a cisgender, somebody that identifies as the same gender as which I was assigned at birth. That can just be helpful to let people know, hey, okay, they're trying. This might be a person I can be safe sharing some harder things with, or this might signal that they want to be more inclusive. And so I think especially if you identify more with a dominant group, the group that's overrepresented usually inside an organization, especially in leadership, you share parts of your identity, use that inclusive language. And I find it's kind of like opening a door to a conversation. It just
Yeah.
puts out the vibe like, okay, like I'm sharing parts of my identity. It's safe for you to share parts of your identity. Let's have that conversation. And it's amazing. You realize like the rich tapestry that we have of human experiences in the
Mhm.
workplace. You probably don't even, what we knew that before the pandemic and now about our coworkers and the people we spent time with. I think we know our networks got smaller.
Yeah.
Strong ties got stronger. Weak ties, unfortunately, got weaker. But the people that we know, like, hey, I didn't even know they had kids, or I didn't know
Right.
they lived in this place, or I had no idea that this was their hobby. That's really cool and important. There was never an on and off switch between work and life before, but we certainly learned that there is a blurring, a tethering of those dual identities. And,
Yeah.
inclusion especially doesn't turn off in the workplace. There's so many
Right.
opportunities in our personal spaces to do better with this too.
I like how you said kind of just extending that invitation or showing that you're open to the conversations and meeting people where they're at, right? I mean, you never want to pressure people or, meet a coworker for the first time and ask for their whole life story or anything. I mean, that could be very overwhelming, but also potentially inappropriate in the situation. But just showing like, hey, using the language, just intentionality with language and just the way that we kind of maybe show people that we're open to that dialogue, I think could be really beneficial and helpful. And I think it's a small thing that we can do that really could have a very profound impact.
Yeah, you raise a good point. I mean, you don't want to come out of the get-go and ask for someone's life story or
Exactly.
or a lot of people that, people will say like, well, where are you from?
Hmm.
That's a very othering thing to say to somebody because you're assuming like they're not from here
Yeah.
even,
Yeah.
and so I get it. It's an honest question. You want to know, like our brains love categories and figuring people out.
Hmm.
But wait, build some trust with somebody first before you go all in
Yeah.
into trying to know their life story. I know for me, I'm an open book. I don't mind
Hmm.
sharing a lot about myself, but not everyone's like that, especially folks that are marginalized. They've been
Hmm.
taught to hide those
Yeah.
parts of their identity. I don't want to talk about my race. I don't want to talk about my ethnicity. I just want to be like everybody else. Well, and we all want to fit in and
Hmm.
feel like we're a part of a group, but it's part of those unique identities that we bring to the conversation that we know and we feel like we can be our full selves and we feel psychologically safe. Those are the most high performing teams. I mean, you get better rates
Yeah.
of innovation, you get better profitability, revenues. I mean, this has all been really well studied with the business case for DEI. But at the same time, we're not, representation numbers are not
Hmm.
really changing despite that well known business case. So I think we really need to activate the human case for this too and talk about why. Like, why is it really so important? And if we've got that dialed in an organization, I've seen amazing things happen with teams when they really commit to that why and have a vision for the future, unlocks that human potential inside
Hmm.
everyone.
Yeah. I think you might be a bit of a mind reader because I think you kind of jumped at the next question I was going to ask, and I think you did a pretty good job answering it. But what I was going to ask is just like you said, you've had this passion for about 8 years, and I was just going to ask, like, in the time from when you first developed that passion to now, have you seen progress or have you seen positive change? And it sounds like kind of like you're saying, like it's been studied more, and it's something that there are a lot of empirical data on, but maybe we're still not really moving
Mhm.
towards where we need to be at. Is that kind of the case?
Yeah, I mean, the best data point is that McKinsey does, in my opinion, the best job at measuring representation data holistically across
Okay.
industries and functional areas. And what they find is over the last 5 years, as they have studied this and quantified it, very slow shifts in representation. So, 1, 2, 3 point shifts in representation at different levels of an organization. The front
Hmm.
lines, yeah, pretty representative of the general population. But as you move to manager, senior manager, C suite,
Yeah.
those numbers go precipitously down,
Yeah.
and those numbers are not changing. Especially, women. I think I just saw a report today that we're almost back to pre-COVID employment numbers of women. So
Okay.
let that soak in for an example. Tons of women left the workforce because
Mm-hmm.
caregiving, right? Caregiving is in crisis. Didn't feel like you could do all things, and you're going to pick your family over your work because most women are the primary caregivers here in the
Right.
United States. And most men are still, the bias is that they're the providers, which isn't always the
Mm-hmm.
case. A lot of
Right.
times they're dual providers, even in that
Right.
case. And so, just from a gender perspective, not a lot of traction, not a lot of movement. We're at a record 8% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. Single digit
Wow.
eight. That's a record.
Yeah.
It was like 5%. So I guess there's a little bit of traction there, but
Right.
boards still, 80% white male, generally
Mm-hmm.
speaking. We had a lot of work to do from a gender and race perspective. And of course, I always talk about diversity more broadly, because if we just center on race and gender, it's very easy for the white male potential ally to be like, oh, conversation's not for me. Oh, I'm the bad guy.
Right.
And those are the very people. What we need are the people in positions of power to recognize that this is a Me Too issue too. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not about you, but
Right.
it is a conversation we all need to be involved in. Because if we don't have places where people feel connected and feel like they
Mm-hmm.
belong, like that's all of our problem as human
Right.
beings.
Right.
We should want that for all human beings, regardless, especially regardless of a part of their identity that someone can't choose or control. I can't
Mm-hmm.
choose the fact that I was born a woman.
Right.
I didn't choose the fact that I was born white in a white dominant culture. And so some of these things, a part of my identity, I recognize are privileges that I can use for good,
Yeah.
in areas where I might need an ally to support me, maybe from a male perspective occasionally. And it's the both and of the experience. I find this to be very paradoxical, which is hard. People
Mm-hmm.
don't like that tension of opposites. Our brains like those categories,
Yeah.
good, bad. And
Mm-hmm.
so much of this conversation is a good-ish.
Right.
We're trying. And you think about gender and race, there's spectrums.
Mm-hmm.
Increasingly multicultural is the biggest growing demographic here in the States, and gender is fluid. It's a spectrum. It's not just male or female. Increasingly, folks, now that there's a lot of awareness around, are identifying as non-binary,
Mm-hmm.
transgender. So these things, these identities are shifting and changing, and I think we need to do a better job of representing those identities inside our organization. Because if not, like we're not going to be relevant to future customers, communities we want to serve, employees. So you really risk kind of becoming outdated, if you
Exactly.
will, by not being more representative and inclusive.
Yeah, and it's funny as you're kind of explaining that this might be a weird kind of comparison, but I thought of like technology in the sense that if we still were using the computers that were out like in the 90s, I don't even know if we'd be having this recording right now. So it's like with technology, you have to keep up with the times, and everyone understands that. Everyone knows, oh, I want the new iPhone or whatever every year because it's constantly adapting and improving and like going towards the direction you want it to be. And so it's kind of that similar aspect of like if organizations aren't adapting and changing and seeing progress in these areas, like you said, that they will become outdated or alienate people. And there's so many incredible candidates or workers or just individuals out in the world who might just never get the opportunity or not feel like they want to be a part of a specific organization because they feel like they will be an outsider or of the experience that it might be for being someone with XYZ identifier that just isn't as welcoming in that workspace.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that analogy
Hmm.
with technology.
Yeah.
Of course, I think for people ask that question, like, yeah, why do I like to get the new phone? Why do I like
Hmm.
to get the new model of computer or,
Hmm.
the technology you use in your home? To be relevant, to keep up. And the
Yeah.
same goes with diversity. The world is changing. We
Yeah.
are becoming much more of a blend across all these identities. So
Hmm.
if we're not embracing that, then we're kind of, holding on to our old laptops and phones. Like,
Right.
I don't want to change. I want
Right.
the world to change. Like, well, that's probably not the way it's going to go. So
Exactly.
stay up with it. And I just say too, I mean, aside from just keeping up to date, it's really like how you learn and grow as a
Mm-hmm.
human. I feel like as I've gotten into the allyship work, it's helped me be better in other aspects of my life, whether that's caregiving, listening more, or that's empathizing more with friends and family. Certainly as a business owner,
Mm-hmm.
feeling, really when I connect with my team and make sure that they feel included and that they feel represented. And those are tricky things to do sometimes when we
Yeah.
don't quite have it the way we want it. Like, how do you push in the face of that adversity?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what allies do is you stay with it even when it's hard, because especially when it's hard, that's when we need our allies the most.
Definitely. Something that I was thinking about, Julia, is like I think about some, potential organizations or just anything out there, and sometimes it feels like that organization might be talking about inclusivity or diversity or promoting diversity, but it almost seems like inauthentic, or it's like, I know that if I do this, it's going to help with my profit, or it's going to, just make us look good in PR or whatever the case may be. So I guess is there a way that we can filter out whether like this is authentic or just like a business move? Because I think
Yeah.
like anyone could argue it like I guess is a business move, but we don't want that to be the intentions behind it, right? We want to do it because it's the right thing, not because it's gonna earn the company an extra, you know, few dollars.
Yeah, there's been a lot of inauthenticity,
Mm-hmm.
especially in a corporate space. It can be opportunistic when the news cycle is such to make a statement, make your donation,
Mm-hmm.
check the box, do the thing. And I find it fascinating, the organizations. Obviously, the summer of 2020 was a time when that happened a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There are people going back and checking those statements and checking that activity and saying, okay, what are you doing now? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
changed? And I love the accountability, because consumers, employees are going to hold organizations accountable, and they're going to vote with their dollars and with
Yeah.
where they choose to spend time and be employed. And that's the reality now, that individuals do have a lot more power,
Mm-hmm.
than I think the mammoth organizations have historically had. That's probably not going to change, anytime soon with labor challenges and
Mm-hmm.
people really caring about corporate social responsibility. I think Patagonia is just an example of, the CEO, recently, donated the organization to climate change
Right.
nonprofit. I mean, like, how cool is that?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing they got a surge of orders
Oh, I'm
from that.
sure. Yeah.
I had just placed an order recently. It is a pricey investment buying things there.
It
But I
is.
felt good about it. Like,
Yeah.
I felt like this is an organization that's aligned with my values. They've been doing the work a long time. They do it when it's not even cool.
Mm-hmm.
And there are largely in the outdoor space that's not very diverse.
Right.
Okay. And so they have an opportunity, like they know they have an opportunity to attract different types of consumers to an industry that would benefit the industry as well as them. And so that's not why we do it. And I have a good feeling that's not why they did it.
Right.
You're doing it for the right reason, but I think people are really smart and clever about deciphering if it's real or not.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you know if it's real? For me, it's like three criteria. It's one, consistency.
Okay.
Two, it's intentionality, right? We know our why. It's aligned with our
Mm-hmm.
values. This is part of who we are in our strategy. And then senior leadership, not to harp on that, but if you don't have your senior leadership engaged, I've just seen tremendous differences. I have a client right now where their COO and CFO recently have been on calls, opening up and closing and participating really actively. And the tone, you get hundreds of people on those calls because they see the C-suites paying
Right.
attention. So I'm going to pay attention. Versus when they're not there, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I'm going to multitask during this call, or, blow it off
Right.
because I can get my work done and that's more valued here. So I think big signals from the top, and it has to be done again consistently and
Yeah.
intentionally.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people can sniff that out so quick.
Right. Yeah, I think those are good points. And yeah, I think as humans, whatever it is, no matter what it's in, I think we have a pretty good radar on what is authentic and inauthentic. So I think that was a good point. Um, to anyone that's listening to this conversation and is really kind of like, this is really cool, but what can I do? Or I'm just a part-time worker at my job, or I'm not in management, or maybe I'm a student and, this is something that I'm finding a passion for. What can people listening do to maybe work towards creating or providing that inclusive space or just becoming an ally? Do you have any suggestion or advice to anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think research what you don't understand. So
Okay.
education's a huge part of it. And please don't go to like the one person in your network that can educate you on what it's like to have a disability or be black or, fill in the blank. Read something, do something first. You can do a Google search with your question and find a reputable resource.
Hmm.
I also would recommend we've vetted a lot of resources. There's some wonderful podcasts, books, videos out there, but not all are, really representative of what we're looking for. And so we vetted a lot of resources and have that on our web page too, like 10 pages of content. I think educate yourself first,
Hmm.
understand what you don't know, figure out how you can fill in the gaps of what you don't know, and stay curious. Really stay curious. Diversifying your network is a wonderful learning experience. I did that exercise when I first started my business. Who was I hanging out with my first year? It was like white women, business owners, moms. Like, well, mirror, mirror, that's me.
Yeah.
As most of us,
Yeah.
shame on me. I could do better. And it did require work, but it wasn't hard. Like, it was
Hmm.
like, "Oh, well, I have a friend of color. I'll ask her, like, what networking group she goes to, what she would recommend." Or I have a friend, that identifies as queer, like, how can I better be supportive and an ally to her in that
Hmm.
community? So you just find that there's these everyday entry points. One thing I think too is, look at the diversity calendar for the year. And we have one on our website, and there's some great ones out there. But, it's not just Black History Month, Women's History Month. It's not just Martin Luther King Day and Hispanic, Heritage Month. There is so much activity throughout the year. So
Hmm.
if you're really intentional and follow along, not just with the days and the months, but think about those as reasons to participate and celebrate
Yeah.
alongside and amplify voices. I think one of the things you can do is diversify who you follow on social media. Listen to podcasts by people that are very different from you. You learn so much by following those voices and amplifying those voices and supporting those voices. So, last thing I'll say is just, vote with your dollars.
Yeah.
There's some great, not, no organization's perfect in this by any means, but there's some great, Patagonia type organizations out there that are doing this work.
Hmm.
And they need to be supported financially for that. And Target's another great example. They have deeply committed to Black business owners over time. And it wasn't just a
Hmm.
2020 thing, they've stayed with it. They have better diverse representation on their shelves as a result of that, which is great, good for everybody. So pay attention to companies, like what they're doing, how committed they are to this, and reward them.
Yeah.
Show them that is something you care about too, and they'll do more of it.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice. Thank you for that. And, I think it's just something that I've talked on this podcast about before is just the power of social media. So, kind of like you're saying, Julie, just like who you follow and, amplifying those voices. I think that that's the way that I normally have the conversation about social media is like, follow those positive sources, not things that are going to drain you or that's, always negative or toxic. So, yes, like that still rings true, but also like add in the aspect of maybe diversifying your network that way and just, seeing what resonates with you and sharing that, amplifying that. And I think even like this conversation is a great example of that. Just I cold approached Julie, just to see if she wanted to be a part of the podcast. And I think now you're someone that I've learned a lot from through this conversation and just seeing the kind of work that you do leading up to this conversation. So it's like I feel like I've grown from that, and we're from different places in the country, different identifiers and things like that. So it's really cool to just build that network and see what other people's experiences are about, because you never know. And like you said, you only have lived and can live your own life, so you don't know what anyone else's is, even if you try to empathize, which is good. It's good to empathize with others or try to see from different perspectives, but you'll never truly understand it.
No, and I admit that
Hmm.
constantly is my vantage point is limited to what I've
Yeah,
experienced and
exactly.
to what I've heard from others. I mean, I think once you've heard similar stories, again, back to those
Hmm.
microaggressions, I remember the first time I heard a Black woman tell me that her hair, was touched frequently. It's like, what? Like,
Yeah.
what?
Hmm.
You almost in like disbelief, like, no one tries to touch my hair. Like, what's
Right.
going on?
Right.
And then, you of course hear that story countless times. Now, hundreds of times I've heard it. And I was like, oh, shoot, this is bad. Like,
Yeah.
why are people doing that?
Hmm.
And then you realize, like, that's something I don't have to go through. Like,
Yeah.
what would it be like if other people didn't have to go through that?
Hmm.
And I think too, like, back to, you reaching out, I think it's when you reach out to people that are different from you or that you're curious about or you want to learn about, I think coming across very genuine as you
Hmm.
did is like, hey,
Thank you.
you're somebody I want to learn from. I really want my audience to learn from. Most people are going to take you up on that and want to help.
Hmm.
When it comes from a genuine,
Yeah.
authentic place. You can tell, and I get messages all the time, and I've sent messages of like, "Hey, I really like what you're doing," and you
Yeah.
can tell, like, they don't know
Yeah.
what you're doing. They're just trying to get you to do something you don't wanna do.
Right.
If you really have a genuine curiosity about somebody and can connect with them in a meaningful way, I mean, that's just fun, right?
Yeah, it
I
is.
live in a
That's
world where those
yeah.
things happen, right? They don't, they don't happen as organically as you would
Mm-mm.
think.
Right.
75% of white people live in white dominated communities. Like
Mm.
a lot of white people don't even have a friend of color, like, or one. It's just
Yeah.
super problematic. And if we don't get to have that exposure and those learning opportunities, it's very easy to other people. Like, oh, they
Hmm.
must, do this because of that. Or like, why do all those people do this? Like, people are not monoliths. Do not use like a
Yeah.
characteristic of a group that's usually based on a stereotype to
Hmm.
identify someone individually. That's a big, big mistake.
Right.
And so just watch out for those limitations because when you make assumptions about people, you risk really making a big mistake and
Hmm.
perhaps losing out on something that you
Yeah.
could have gained or learned from the conversation by your own limited thinking.
Yeah. Exactly. Very well said. So, Julie, I know that through this conversation, you've mentioned a few of the things that you do. You've mentioned the website that you have. Are there any like specific things that you like to put out there for people to follow along with your journey, or to get more information about what you do, or just anything like that?
Yeah, yeah. So everything you can find, we have tons of free resources on our website. We want to give back to folks as much as we can. So that's nextpivotpoint.com. And that's actually our social handle too. So just next pivot point.
Okay.
You can find us on Insta, Twitter, Facebook, all the places. And then I would encourage you to on LinkedIn. I post daily there.
Hmm.
So always looking for interaction, questions, thoughts, that kind of thing. So you can follow me there on LinkedIn, just Julie Kratz, Kratz. And then just circling back to the website, nextpivotpoint.com, we have free downloadable resources. So one
Perfect.
of it's like how to build your DEI strategy, which a
Okay.
lot of organizations are struggling with right now.
Yeah.
Inclusive language to use. So we have like a diversity dictionary. We have that calendar of like
Yeah.
how to celebrate, not just what to celebrate, but how to
Mm.
celebrate different months and days. And just be mindful, especially as I know a lot of people are planning for 2023. Don't be the person that asks for a speaker for Black History Month in January. Like that doesn't look intentional. Ask
No.
now,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
And for me, Women's History Month is really big. So people start asking now,
Yeah.
we want to do an event. So plan ahead, be again intentional with it, be consistent with it. But those tools I think can really help people. And then the
Perfect.
resources list is also very popular because then you can just go and be like, oh, and then we have short descriptions too. So it's not just
Yeah.
like a bunch of URLs. It's,
Hmm.
hey, this book is good and here's what it's about.
Perfect.
So we really try to vet and make, it shouldn't take the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours to learn DEI.
Right.
It has taken me more than that,
Sure.
but we really like to short circuit that process as much as possible because I don't think people realistically have that much time
Right.
to dedicate. So even if, and I hate to say this because people get snooty about it, an hour a month's not enough. But even if it is just an hour a month that you have to commit to the journey, I think that's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And maybe carve out more time as you learn and grow and realize the tangible benefits associated with these behaviors.
Exactly. A little goes a long way. Like you said earlier, progress over perfection. It doesn't have to be, you have to change your whole life and spend 100 hours a month doing, this kind of intentional work, even an hour, even 30 minutes, that's still more than you were doing. So it's stepping in the right direction. But I'll put everything that Julie mentioned, the website, all the socials, her LinkedIn in the description of the episode as well. So if you didn't catch it there, it'll also be down there for you to click it and give it a read or check it out and just see all the resources there. But Julie, as we're wrapping things up, do you have any last like thoughts or message or words that you want to leave to the people listening?
Do something. Just do something. Again, I mean, it sounds silly, but people really are just stuck.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say or do. I did this one thing and it didn't work. So now I'm not going to do anything. And, you know, I get it. I get the fear factor. I empathize with it. But if you get to be afraid of having this conversation, that really says a lot about your privilege. You don't
Yeah.
have to deal with these things, for somebody of different ethnicity or race or disability, like it's not a choice. You can't get
Hmm.
up in the morning and not live that experience. So
Right.
if you don't have to worry about these things, then maybe, just maybe, if you did something, again, you'd learn and grow. So doing something, I think, is really important. None of us want more performative allies. We want real active
Yeah.
allies out there. So do something, one thing, baby steps. Have an intention about it, and I promise there's good things waiting for you on the other side of that.
Perfect. I think that's a great kind of just recap and summary of the things we've talked about. And Julie, it's been an absolute pleasure to get to hear about you, your experience, the work you do. It's tremendous work that's super important, especially these days in the world. And I'm excited to follow along with your journey and to continue to see the work that you do and to support you along the way. So thank you for taking the time to be a part of this. And I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Thanks so much, Zach. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.